So my name's Michael Leworthy. Work on the Azure migration team, or the Azure team, focusing primarily on migration and a couple of other areas as well. So I'm super excited to be talking to you this morning about some of the migration opportunities. So this session is really focusing on how do we think about migration from an Azure perspective. And how many people here went to the Azure Migrate session on Tuesday? All right, one, fantastic. So I want to talk a little bit about that technology, which is great. And then the great thing about Azure Migration is there's tools that Microsoft have. You know, we've had some tools for a while with this thing called Azure Site Recovery, because it's always good to have a migration tool called Site Recovery. And there's other tools that we're releasing as well. But the big thing about Azure Migration, and one thing is awesome in the way that you want to use things, is the vast ecosystem of partners we have here. So I want to talk a little bit about them as well. I'm not going to make it a sales pitch for partners, because there's other people that do that quite well in the field, but I just want to give you practical examples about some of these partners that have been working super close to us and why you should be thinking of them as well, you know, and helping you sort of go through that thin red line of which partners to choose based on, you know, what's your unique needs, because everybody has unique needs in migration. You might be in a situation where you just don't know what you have. You know, as an IT organization, you might have a good view of the things that you own, but we all know there's shadow IT creeps in a lot of organizations, so being able to sort of do that stuff and being able to sort of discover all that information is really, really important. Or you might be in a situation where you want really sort of high fidelity comparison between on-premises and Azure, or on-premises and AWS or GCP, to really sort of give you the confidence about what's the best cloud for you to choose. And in that case, excuse me for a second. We good? Good. So, and then how do we think about, you know, in that sense, this high fidelity, in the sense of understanding the total cost of what you're running in on premises, down to almost the CPU aspects, you know, like how much does this CPU on this server cost an hour? So there's all these partners that have very deep investments in many of these areas. And I want to expose some of those today as we sort of go through this. All right, so why should you think about migration? I mean, and we've thrown lots of Azure stuff at you this week as well, but I always like to open with this slide, and I know it's a marketing slide and everything, but I always like to open with this slide because one of the things here is that when I first started in the Azure team, my job was all about why. So every customer I visited, they'd go, why? Like, why should I go cloud? Why should I do this? Why should I do that? And you know, and we're talking years and years ago, you know, I helped bring the first virtual machine, you know, the VM service in Azure to market, the one that when you turned it off, you lost everything, right? So I've been involved in Azure for quite some time, but over the last 24, 36 months, the whole sort of industry has changed to when and how. So the concept here is that you should be thinking migration as part of your strategy, you know, and that migration may be an app at a time, or a VM at a time, or a data center at a time, but it's becoming sort of the normal oxygen in most, you know, data center evolutions, in the sense of how we do things. So if you're not thinking about it, I can guarantee people above you are, your businesses are, your leaders in the organization are, as they start trying to be more agile, right? And you know, we're not in the business of running, you know, data centers as our, you know, primary business. All you in the businesses of supporting your customers, and your customers are internal businesses or external customers, and they want to be able to run more agile, they want to be able to run more competitively. Migration and cloud migration is the key to do that. So there's some great things associated there. So, and I promise I'll get off the marketing slides in just a sec. But the one thing here, I wrote a document years and years ago called Do More with Less. And if you've been around with Windows Server for a while, you know we went out with Do More with Less, and we touted that 80% of IT budgets is spent on just keeping the data center alive. And that was 2003. And what are we now, 2017? And it's still the same, it hasn't changed. 80% of your budget is still spent on this on-premises stuff. So there's all these new factors in getting to the cloud and how we get to the cloud and why you need to get to the cloud. But our core concept here is that there is oodles amounts of not just money saving, and that's really good, but there's oodles amounts of just saving for you as the IT architects, the IT admins, the IT owners in the organization, just to get rid of all this overhead that you're doing. And migration is the key to do that. So let's talk about migration and what it means. So migration comes in a couple of different formats. Well, we've done the physical server to, in the reality, most organizations, including yourself, are in the hybrid cloud space. And on varying degrees, whether you're just using a couple of cloud services, whether you're using a lot of them, the majority of you are primarily in the hybrid cloud space. And then you're thinking about what's that next evolution, right? How do we start thinking those? Now, the good thing here is that the next step is not just public cloud. It's not just moving this whole virtual machine set or this whole application set into an Azure public cloud or an AWS public cloud or whatever public cloud. There's multiple choices along the way here, and this is where a really strong plan or high fidelity plan on migration is going to work. Now, VM lift and shift is super simple. You want to make instant savings on just getting money back, getting time back. VM lift and shift is beautiful. But a little bit more thinking, you can actually start building a very strong migration plan based on where and how you come into the business. Let me talk a little bit through that. So now, with the invented Azure stack, you now have multiple opportunities of cloud migration, right? Azure Stack is just not a private cloud, and it's not that just a hypervisor with a bunch of service stuff on top of it. It's a high fidelity on-premises version of Azure, as our Scott said. It's 100% API consistent with our Azure public cloud. It is Azure. So you've now got this interesting opportunity. I can move to Azure, still keep that sort of components on premises. I can still keep my arms around the data. So if I've got some reservations about data sovereignty or security, or I just need ownership of stuff, but I want to be able to take advantage of all the new technology, Azure Stack's a really great way to bring that Azure world into on-premises and take that next step. So a couple of things here. Migration. The first step is, what do we leave alone? Now, we don't have to migrate everything. There are solutions in our organization which you may find, you just go, you know what, it's the value of me migrating that, it's old, it's tied to hardware, it's, got, static IPs, it's got a dongle, it's just old, and we're not getting the ROI out of it that we need. In some cases, you may just identify those and say, you know what, we're just going to ride those through to the end of time, and the end of time maybe 6, 12, 24 months, and that's okay. You shouldn't feel the pressure of having to migrate 100% of your data center to the cloud. Unless you're in a situation where you're doing, your data center's up for a lease renewal and you want to just get out of colo or something like that, there are definitely some disruptors in that space, but in the general, leaving alone is really good. And then there's a commodity stuff. Office. I'm an old Exchange engineer. That's how I cut my teeth in the IT industry, was Exchange. And I look at my friends that are still supporting Exchange on premises. I'm like, you know what? Just go. Office 365. Why are you sitting out and building high availability solutions for your Exchange information on premises? It's architecture on premises. To me, from a commodity sense, where you can go SaaS, just do it. Plan for that. Don't plan to take your dynamic system from on premises from a VM perspective and put it into IaaS, or don't take your code repository system that's running on old versions of source control, source safe, put it in IaaS. Just move that commodity stuff into SaaS, because you're going to be making oodles of savings and just decreasing the management overhead in a really big way. Okay, our next one. Lift and shift and modernize. Now, this is really, really interesting because this is where most of the migration effort happens, right? In the sense of how do we think about movement and then modernization. Now, in a real world, if I could, I would never say the words lift and shift. In the real world, what I'd say is like, when you do discovery, you then discover the applications. Those applications are going to be .NET or Node or Java or written in a billion different languages, and you're going to have maybe some workload information. That's, maybe it's running on SharePoint, or maybe it's running on, a Linux-based or open source-based workload. And you're going to have a set of data and a set of storage. And I'm going to say, great, you're going to move the storage into Azure, into blob storage. You're going to use Azure File Sync, or you're going to use Databox, or you're going to use something really cool like that. And then for your database services, you're going to migrate them into Azure SQL, SQL instance. And then the workloads, you're going to look at what the next PaaS version of that workload. If it's SharePoint, you go to Office 365, or you're going to sort of, if it's SAP, you'll use HANA or something like that. And then your application, you're going to move to app services. And that's going to be great. And that's how it should happen. But the challenge with that is it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do this over and over and over again. And that's eventually what you're going to do. I can guarantee it. Eventually, you're going to do that to every single one of your applications that you don't leave alone. You're going to say, hey, even if you move them to the cloud, from an IaaS perspective, you're going to make another mental decision and say, do I leave it alone and just ride the ROI until I retire it? Or do I modernize it into app services? Do I modernize it into containers? Do I modernize it into serverless or microservices or so on and so on? Or do I then just do, in most cases, what we're all doing is lift and shift? And why are we doing lift and shift? I'll show you in a sec why. And it's honestly, it's the right thing to do. Even though you might do this two-punt migration, it's actually the right thing to do. And then, of course, cloud-born makes a lot of sense. If you are building new applications, you are building new cloud applications, right? And this is where Azure Stack's a beautiful, beautiful thing, right? So right now, you have a solution to say, all right, maybe I'm not ready to go public cloud. Maybe there's a blocker in my way, or my organization's just not there yet to go the public utility cloud model. Azure Stack is a way for you to just move into that cloud service capability. The DevOps solutions, the architectural solutions, start bringing those on premises. And before you know it, you build a culture of cloud-enabled, both IT, DevOps, architect and developer organizations. And you'll move to commodity cloud or utility cloud is just a simple thing there. So there's all these, as I said, there's all these migration options. What we're going to focus on primarily today, of course, is the lift and shift and a little bit of the lift and modernize. Now, let me tell you why lift and shift is super important. It's super important because of this, right? The core concept here is, if you lift and shift today, there's about a 20, and I think this is a little low myself, I think it's more like 20 to 30%. But the core concept here is there's an instant saving. I mean, lift and shift isn't all that difficult, right? It doesn't require architectural changes. It doesn't require application changes. You're taking your virtual machines that have been running Hyper-V or vSphere, and you're moving them into the cloud, right? And you're instantly making savings without even changing your management regime or the way you do things. You're just instantly making savings. Right? And those savings, as we all know, both are not just money savings, but there's a little thing back there. I said you spend 28% of your time administering the physical architecture of your on-premise environment. So just returning time back, and every time we get time back, we can go do something that's strategically important. Now, we all know that, like, if we go to PaaS, we'll save any more because then we don't have to manage the operating system and all that type of stuff. But again, lift and shift's going to give you that boost. It's going to just give you that set of investment that you can, modernize, get into the cloud, get more and more focused on much more sort of high fidelity management, utilizing the services tools, and then reinvest that back in the organization. All right, I'm going to skip past AHUB, and then we'll talk a little bit about migration realities. So what gets in the way today? Like, why aren't all you doing this, right? What is the big thing that gets in the way? Well, I think it's too easy. I think the thing's too easy. One, I don't know if it's going to save me money, That's the question I get asked all the time, right? I just don't know. Every time we've looked at it, I've downloaded a calculator, I've taken a sample of my organization, and I've whacked it in a calculator, and it comes out more expensive. So the cloud is more expensive. Absolutely, if you take your on-premises virtual machines and representation of us, and you do a comparison to what they run in the cloud, you'll probably find they will come out more expensive. Because you're not doing any real intelligence around that. And that's the beauty of most of our systems, right? Is that when you do this migration to the cloud, right? Let me step back. As an IT organization, to make things easy for us, when we deploy virtual machines, when we deploy servers, we always over-provision them. Because under-provisioning them sucks, right? You don't want to have to go back and re-provision. Right, and grow things, right? So basically, we always over-provision. It's a SQL server. Great, we'll give it 16 cores and 8 gigs of memory. Maybe a little more, but essentially, we'll always over-provision because we just want to make sure that we just have enough headroom. And we do that over and over and over again because we own the hardware. That's if it's not being utilized, it's fine. It doesn't cost us any more whether it's utilized at 5% or 95%. It costs exactly the same on premises. You take a virtual machine that's only utilized at 5% and you put that in Azure, you're paying for 100% of utilization. So you have 95% of utilization, you're just wasting. So that's, in the sense of most cost analysis breakdowns, that's where a lot of our customers go, have trouble, is that how do they do that right-sizing capabilities? And the second thing is, I don't know where to begin, right? Like, I just don't know the right way to begin. Do I do the whole lot? Where do I start? What's the workload that I should go? Should I take the busiest workload, the unbusiest workload, the most expensive workload, the most, I'm not really sure there. So the idea of stack ranking, building that blueprint for me is really simple. And I just don't know if this stuff will work in Azure. Or every time I look at sort of Azure, I'm like, this doesn't work, and there's some warnings about this, and then we had the 2 terabyte limit, and in my storage, where does it all go? So there's all this sort of confusion. And I think the third area is, I'm scared that during a migration, I can't keep the business running, because that's my job, right? If the business goes down, it doesn't matter how many sort of reports or how many statistics that I talk to my manager about saving money. If our core application is down, then I'm toast. So I get these all the time. Like, how do I know what I got? How do I know how much it's going to cost me? Begin, and then how do I keep the business running? So to make things easier, we looked at migration in 3 core ways: discovery, migration, or migrate, and optimize. So when we think about discovery, is how do you go out and automate discovery? Because no one wants to do this manually. We've all done manual discovery, manual inventory. It's not fun. So I want systems to do this automated, right? To go out and find stuff that I don't know about, to be able to go in and assess those, report on those. And then when I bring that data back, give me an analysis. Tell me how much it's costing me to run those things on premises. And then show me how much it's going to cost me to run in the cloud, knowing that I'm going to run those workloads at as high a percent utilization as I possibly can. So help me out with that, right? If I'm running a 8 proc, multiple, lots of memory type server on premises, and it's only being utilized at 20%, then in Azure, let's run that as a 2 proc virtual machine, right? Bringing my costs right down, but blowing that utilization right up. And then give me recommended reports where to start. How do I start these things? And a migration perspective is, I need a way to migrate with 0 impact to the business. I can't turn virtual machines off. I don't want to work at 3 o'clock in the morning. I want to be able to do this during business hours. I want to be able to do migration in that way. So how do I think about pushing those things across those? How do I take advantage of server replication? What about bandwidth? How do I think about moving of data? But I want to be able to do these things without impact. And then I want to also think about, at this stage, how do I take advantage of new modern architecture? Now, I've still got lift and shift in my brain, like maybe I can think about moving applications into serverless and stuff. That's great. But containers gives me that sort of glue right in the middle. It's between traditional lift and shift, and then the modern serverless microservices sort of re-architect. So I can take an application, .NET, Linux application, and I can containerize the hell out of that. And you know what that means? It's basically instead of running a virtual machine, a big virtual machine for that application, I run a sliver of it. And so instead of now my 100 applications taking 100 virtual machines and costing me $1,000 a month, I can take those 100 applications, run them in 100 containers, and on one container instance, it costs me $10 a month. So again, it gives me economies of scale. And you know what? There's no re-architecting, right? You can take most applications and convert them to containers. Right? In fact, we've got a partner that's probably sitting in this audience that just has building a tool that enables you to do this overnight. We have Avanade and Accenture around their containerization service that do this at huge, large scale. There's some wonderful, wonderful tools that enable to do that. And plus, we've got some new areas of data as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about data and database migration, because these things too sort of marriage up. Now, that third area, optimize, is super important, because migration doesn't stop. Like, once you've migrated in, it doesn't stop. You're going to have to continually tend those systems. They're like any IT system. Like, I've got a virtual machine, I've moved it from, I've moved this intelligent, right-sized virtual machine into Azure. It's going to have different performance characteristics as it's being used in different ways. Maybe it'll be static and it'll be quite happy and I won't have to touch it again, but maybe it's going to be used more, maybe it's going to be used less. So there's always going to have to be this continual upkeep of those virtual machines. So we need optimization tools to be able to ensure that we can continually monitor these, both from performance and reliability, but mainly from cost optimization. How do I do continual right-sizing? Hey, if that virtual machine, that was on premises and I was driving at 20%, and then in Azure, I'm going to drive it at 95%, so I've resized it to the right Azure series, and then 3 months' time, I'm finding a decreasing usage of that application, I'm still paying for that sort of series I bought it over with. So I want the system to tell me, hey, you know what? That your usage is decreasing on that, drop the series down, make some savings. Or, this thing's butting into 100% lot, let's pop it up a little bit more, right? Because now you're running into SLA issues on your performance. So we like to think about easy migration. Discover, migrate, and optimize, and then how do you thread through this? Now, the good thing about this is in most organizations, you're going to find that you're going to be running this activity in parallel across multiple projects. So you're going to have some projects in discovery, and some projects in optimization, and some projects in migration. You want to be able to sort of work through those. I mean, you're not going to discover 1,000 virtual machines and then just lift and shift those 1,000 virtual machines as one big heap. You're going to do this over and over again. You're going to take 20 virtual machines from an application and move those across and optimize those, and 50 from another and 10 from another. And you want to make that a very seamless process. So when we think about migration, in the sense that, the workflow is pretty simple. App and workload discovery. We have a bunch of great tools to do this. I'm actually going to bring one of our partners up on stage soon to show you a great demonstration of their technology and their tools on discovery and assessment. Once you've done discovery, my next thought is we should start thinking about containerizing. Now, containerization is one of these interesting things in the sense you can do it on Azure, you can do it on premises. I'm a big fan of doing it before you migrate. I like migrating little things, right? Anything that's big takes time to migrate. I mean, the internet's a bunch of tubes and pipes, right? So if you have a real small tube and you're trying to squash a lot of stuff down that tube, it takes a little while, even in server replication. So anytime I can reduce the footprint of my on-premises capability, it's going to be faster for me to migrate. It's going to cost me less to migrate. So I love the idea of, once I've discovered all my applications, let's containerize everything that I can. All right? It's super simple to do. As I said, there's no re-architecting. Windows Server 2016 has containers inbuilt into it. The platform's there, right? So it's super simple to do in that sort of sense. And once I've done that, And containers itself, from a system perspective, from a replication, just looks like essentially a virtual machine. And right? So from a lift and shift, it doesn't change. Whether you're doing a full VM or a container VM, it doesn't change. So we got the ability of using ASR, or again, a bunch of third-party tools that enable this. And then from a data perspective, we like to split the data out into another set of tools. And then when we move into performance and cost management, yeah, we've got tools like our OMS capabilities, our secure and well-managed infrastructure investments that Azure does, and then a number of third-party tools as well. But again, from a modernization perspective, even though we won't go into this too deeply, this is the time, once that application's in Azure, that you can really start thinking about what's the next evolution of that application. Now, the beautiful thing about this is you're not on your own there. We have another set of partners that can come in and do code refactoring. They can look at your .NET apps and say, hey, to make this run in serverless or app service, this is what you need to do. Line 28, this colon needs to be here, right? Super simple stuff to do. All right, talked a little bit about microservices already, so we're just going to wander past this one. Said before, we have a bunch of tools across every phase. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of partners in this space. There's plenty of others. But these are a set of partners that we have worked with super close, and helping us, develop our migration strategy. They've been helping our customers also with their migration capabilities, and they're partners that we'll recommend across the board. As I said, it's not an exhaustive list. There's a lot of others as well, Risk IT and BitTitan, and the plate spin, and the list goes on and on and on. So just feel if your partner of choice is not up there, that doesn't mean anything, all right? So the cool thing here as well is there is a set of tools, and it doesn't matter what set of tools you choose at the set of at the instance, it doesn't change anything, right? You could use Moveair for discovery and assessment, and then use Cloud Endure for your migration, and use Cloud Atlas for your optimization piece, and all this stuff will still work together. So there's none of this, once I've chosen first step, then that excludes me from second and third steps. So that's the beauty about this ecosystem. By luck or by force, each one of them is very well sort of focused in each one of their pillars. So again, you've got the ability here to choose the right tool for you based on what you need. For example, if we think about, migration, where would I choose ASR, where would I choose Cloud Endure? That's going to totally rely on the type of workloads that you're pushing across, and whether you want to use the first-party migration tool to migrate to Azure, or you want to look at the confidence of a partner to do that, right? So again, it's going to come down to a specific choice that you make. Now, let me talk a little bit about some of the barriers and some of the services across the space to help you in migration. So what are the services that we have to help with migration out of the box? We have a new service called Azure Migrate. I'll show you a quick demo of it in a sec. And this is a service that we released on Monday, actually, in limited public preview. Now, the only difference between a limited public preview and a public preview is a limited public preview, you have to fill a little survey out to get it. We have to onboard you into the system. Now, we'll public preview it later this calendar year, but again, it has the same capabilities, has the same scale, you shouldn't feel worried about using it. But Azure Migrate enables, if we think about in that first column again, discovery and assessment, Azure Migrate enables that capability when I can do discovery of virtual machines and then assessment of those. Again, I'll show you a quick demo of that to show what I mean. Then we have a new tool, which we are in public preview now this week, called Azure Database Migration Service. Now, if you've ever done database migration, you've exposed yourself to the wily world of Microsoft's database migration, which I think last time I counted, we had about 6 database migration tools between, DMA, Database Migration Assistant. We had this SMSC something with the competitive migration. The SQL team's trying to bring this all down to one tool. One tool for assessment and discovery, and then one tool for migration. And DMS is going to be that tool. And Database Migration Service, we'll talk a little bit about it later, effectively just enables me to instead of doing lift and shift of the VM, I'm doing lift and shift of the data. and then I can choose the destination of the data. When we talked about optimization, we announced Azure Cost Management by Cloud-In. It's the happiest person in the world when we acquired Cloud-In, because it was one of the pieces that was very much missing in any migration capability, is how to do this optimization. So with Azure Cost Management now, you can do that ongoing cost estimation. And the wonderful thing about it is it's free for you as an Azure customer. So if you're an Azure subscriber, an Azure customer, you get access to that tool as part of your cost optimization pieces as well. Azure Hybrid Use Benefit is more of an offer. You know, and the concept here are both for SQL and Windows Server. And what essentially this is if you own Windows Server under software assurance on premises, you can run that Windows Server from a migration perspective at just compute costs, right? Because let me tell you exactly what that means. So if you go to Azure today and you whip up a Linux server with 2 processors, and you whip up a Windows server with 2 processors, they'll have 2 different price points. Right? Because one, you're paying for the compute costs. You know, what are they? God damn it. Processors, memory, it's a tough week. Processors, memory, network, you're paying for those. But on the Windows side, you're paying for a license, right? And then, so one may be 10 cents an hour and the other one may be 18 cents an hour because you're paying for that perpetual license. With Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, you basically just pay for the compute, whether you're running. So essentially, you get the Windows Server at sort of Linux prices, if we want to say it in very layman's terms. So again, the majority of your organizations are going to have some Windows Server under software assurance, so you can take advantage of this straight out of the pack. And between this and the reserve instances that we announced this week, there's like up to 70% savings in running these Windows capabilities and even Linux capabilities in the cloud as well. And then also we announced Azure Data Box. And so we have those 2 storage when we think about application migration or VM migration, but then just the storage. I've got all these NFS, all these SAN systems that I want to be able to migrate into Azure. What's an easy way of doing it? Well, now with Azure File Sync, great way to do it, to keep that in sync, and I can actually easily do that. Or now, if I've got large amounts of data, put it in a box, whack it off to UPS or FedEx, and then it arrives in an Azure center, they plug it in, and that migration happens super, super simple. So some really great ways now, or offers now, we can do things. So let's wander into lift and shift and talk a little bit about lift and shift. So we talked a little bit about those and why you want to do those, but essentially lift and shift comes down to a couple of things as well. There's lots of disruptors in your organization of why you need to move to the cloud. And some of those are easy in the sense that, hey, my budget just got slashed and the cloud's going to provide me sort of that utility model to do things like that. Or I'm running out of scale. Right, I'm just running out of stuff and the cloud's bottomless, so I can do those things. Lots of pressure like that. My colo lease is coming up for renewal and I don't want to do that again and sign another 2 or 3 year deal. I want to think about that. So there's all these disruptive pressures, but one of the core concepts here is, when we think about it, is like, how do I just get out of the business of managing the data center and get into the business of managing our customer, and the applications that support that? I think that's one of the biggest compelling reasons of any lift and shift. So I want to talk a little bit about Azure Migrate and then a couple of other tools in these areas. So the tool that we released to help with the initial discovery aspect is a tool called Azure Migrate. Right, and Azure Migrate will do a couple of cool things for you. One, utilizing a virtual appliance, it's going to discover and assess on-premises virtual machines and servers. So today, it works with VMware in its current preview. As we move forward, it will be able to support Hyper-V, and as we move forward, it will be able to do physical servers as well. Now, when we talk physical servers, you won't be able to use a virtual appliance. You're in agent world at that stage. But for Hyper-V and vSphere, you'll be able to use a virtual appliance. That's great. So doing discovery, and if you knew your architecture really, really well, then the agentless discovery is a great way to do it. Now, if you don't know your architecture all that well, like you don't know which application or which server is talking to which server and which application itself, and you need help with that, then it has inbuilt dependency mapping. So we've taken our acquisition with Blue Stripe that we happened a few years ago, and we've built that into Azure Migrate. Now, dependency mapping does require an agent, so we'll need to deploy an agent to all the machines, and we've got great ways to do that. Integra is a great company that deploys agents really, really simply, right? So that gives me the ability to do it. But if I want to do that deep discovery and analysis of all the ways servers and applications talk to each other, then the inbuilt dependency mapping is going to be able to do that. And the good thing about this is it's not just server dependency mapping. A lot of companies stop at the server dependency mapping perspective. We do both server dependency mapping, but we also do application dependency mapping as well. So these applications open up, little paths to, through APIs and things like that to servers that the server dependency mapping may not cache. So we can make sure that we're looking at both areas, server and application dependency mapping, to build this group for you of the sort of applicational workloads you want to migrate into Azure. Does intelligent right-sizing, looks at the application, the configuration, the utilization, and makes the best guess on the best way to run that in Azure. And I'll show you some configuration things associated with that. Does compatibility reporting. Will this run in Azure? Right? Does it support it? Azure. Is there something that it won't run? Maybe it's an unsupported version of CentOS. Maybe it's an old version of Windows. Maybe it's bigger than 4 terabytes. Maybe it's got UEFI as a boot sector. There's something about that it won't run in Azure, and I'm going to give you a bit of recommendations and do it. And then the last thing, it's going to migrate workloads through replication. Now, it's not going to do this today, but we're taking the ASR technology, the Azure Site Recovery technology, and we're baking this into Azure Migrate to give you a single sort of experience in both discovery and assessment and migration. So it can do a lot of things in that. I'm going to give you a bit of a demonstration of this. All right. So here's Azure Migrate. As I said today, it works with vSphere 5.5 and 6.0 right now. It will work with 6.5 as we move into GA, and also Hyper-V. And in this demonstration, you probably saw me do a little bit of this on Monday, but I want to go a little bit deeper into these areas as well. So in this case, basically, you've discovered a bunch of virtual machines, and we can go look at all those virtual machines and what they are. Maybe. I always love it when demos break. Yeah, I know. I forgot. So why are we talking here? I'm going to go install Chrome. And we're going to not help make Google better. And we're going to do this again. I'm sorry about this, but the edge on these machines are locked down a little bit, and there's some things that just don't work a little bit. So while this is downloading, all right. Everyone go to Universal tonight? Totally. I'm going to put my Harry Potter stuff on, and migrate. Ignite, that's it. So this man here who's telling me what to do is the chief architect of Azure Migrate. There we go. All right, we're going to log on. Now you're going to look at the Microsoft's authentication system. Yeah, here we go. Okay, we're going to do it this way. Going to bring up my phone here. Give it a second. And bingo. All right. I can use Chrome and log on to Azure. So, all right, so let's do it again. So, In this case here, I've gone and discovered a bunch of virtual machines. And I say use a virtual appliance for here, and there's lots of information. If you go back and watch Sean Shah's Azure Migrate session on Tuesday, they'll walk through the virtual appliance, how to download it from Azure, how to deploy it. It's super simple. You just need a few credentials in your vSphere, so it's very non-invasive. So I've got a bunch of virtual machines, and all those virtual machines are displayed, and I can go and view all that information. So you can see there what dependencies, whether it has agents deployed, and so. Now the good thing here, in the sense, what I can think about is, if I know my architecture really well, I can go start creating manual groups. And these manual groups are tags within vSphere. So I'll go and tag a set of virtual machines as the Contoso application, or the business application, or the HR application, or something, workload. And it will respect those tags when they bring it in, which is great. And that means I can build sort of these groups manually, or I can sort of group them together as part of this as well. But as I said before, when we've got inbuilt dependency mapping, I can do this as part of it as well. So in this case, I'm going to sort of just, in the matter of time, show you a set of virtual machines which we've pre-tagged and brought those in. But I can also add further virtual machines in that through our dependency aspects as well. So here's a good view of the integrated dependency mapping. And this is super, super deep, because as I said, it uses the service map capability. So it can pull in all that, what's talking to what application's talking, what ports they're talking, what's the operating system. It will also discover virtual machines that it may be that I didn't put into the original map, and I want to be able to go and install an agent on there to do sort of deeper discovery. So let me give you a view of this. So you can see here, it's showing me all the services that we're talking to from a dependency perspective. But again, if we bring this down a couple of views, that's all sort of the map of what this application is doing and what they're talking to. So I can actually sort of start and do a search for, say, one of these pieces, and say, I know that the front-end server of this application is called this. Show me what it's talking to, and it can bring those things together. And then all I need to do is sort of say, all right, I want this, and I want this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. And I'm basically going then to create a group out of those, and then I can do assessment on those groups. So it makes things really simple in the way that you want to build these groups of applications or workloads. Now, once I've done dependency mapping, I can sort of create an assessment from that. And an assessment is sort of using all the data I've collected for a little bit of information. So in this case, I'm just going to use an assessment that I pre-configured, and it gives me two really great sort of things. The first thing is it shows me Azure readiness. How ready is this application to move or to run into Azure? So in this case here, I can dive down and get further information associated with that. In this case, it will tell me, all right, boot type's not supported, take me out to some guidance associated with that, or I've got older OSs, maybe it's running Windows Server 03, or you're coming up to Windows Server 08 as we come to end of life of that. And so we do best effort. Hey, they'll work, the synthetic drivers will work, but I want to tell you it's best effort, right? If something goes wrong, be prepared for it, mitigate that. If you can upgrade it, do that, right? But again, it will work. But again, you need to be a little bit more focused on it. And then if it's unsupported, I'm going to tell you it's unsupported. Again, I'm not saying it won't work, but I'm going to say it's an unsupported version of CentOS. So if something goes a bit mischievous, you need to think about that as well. Also, I will do suggested tools for migration. And the great thing here is, you can see here, it's saying, hey, we require a bit of deep discovery of this to understand it a little bit more, so you can put a little bit of an agent on there. But in this case, if it finds a database and saying, hey, this is a SQL server, it's running a database, instead of lift and shifting this from a virtual machine perspective, use DMS, Database Migration Service. Because what I can do there is I can look at all the SQL instances, the databases, and then move them into PaaS, right? And you've got a couple of choices here. You can move into a SQL virtual machine, great, easy lift and shift, or you can move them into Azure SQL, which is awesome, but Azure SQL is not fully, has full parity yet with Azure, SQL on premises. So we've released a new version of Azure SQL called Azure SQL Instance. To me, it's almost like PaaSifying IaaS, if you know what I mean. right? Because in an IaaS perspective, you still own the operating system and have to tend to the operating system. And then you still own the workload. You have to tend to the workload. So I have to have an administrative set for Windows, an administrative set for SQL, and then I've got a bunch of really good data dudes, geeks that are doing my data on top of that. SQL Instance is we manage the Windows infrastructure and the SQL infrastructure on your behalf. So it's sort of pacifying IaaS in a way. I love the model. I expect to see this model even more as we move forward, because I think it's a great way to get all the functions of SQL in Azure while the Azure SQL technology sort of increases and grows up. And then you can see here an Azure Site Recovery from a suggested tool. And as I said before, as we move forward, Azure Site Recovery will be part of this technology. So that's super exciting that, again, you'll be able to have this sort of one view associated with that. The other area is cost details. This gives me the ability to then break down into, compute costs and storage costs for this application, which I think is super great. I can look at this and say, all right, how much is application or this workload going to cost me a month? And I've got a bunch of configuration that I can do here. So I can drive through my target location, because things are going to change based on my target location. So I can say, hey, I want to make sure it's in Dublin or South Africa or something like that. How I want my storage. And the big thing that I love here is, what utilization do I want to run? Like, what's my comfort level? Do I want to run this at 99%? Do I run it at 90% or 50%? Give me the cost analysis based on that. And that's going to define that intelligent right sizing I talked about. So by default, you want to run these things as high as possible. 95% gives you a little bit of comfort factor. That's going to give me the best cost optimization aspect as well. Currency, which is really good. Discount, so if you've got a sort of an idea of the discount you get through your LA or through Microsoft, you can whack this in there as well. And whether you're going to use hybrid use benefit for Windows Server here as well, which is the thing I talked about as well. So you've got a lot of configuration aspects that you can do here to sort of modify that cost analysis in ways. And then again, you can pick on each of these, and it will show you information associated with this. What's the cost of this virtual machine? What Azure size? You can see here, it's saying, hey, this is a standard A0. That's the intelligent right size that we've told to do. So this is, we found all this stuff here, and how do we do that, and what's its conditions? So, a great tool for discovery and assessment, and to be able to enable you to start looking at what your migration costs and how are you going to, what's your sort of migration capability as you move into Azure. All right. All right. Now, a couple of great partners as well in this space as well. There's a number of partners, but I want to walk through a sort of couple of them. One of them is Cloudimize. So Cloudimize is a really close partner to Microsoft, and they provide really in-depth course discovery and assessment that enables you to also do the initial aspect of that first phase of migration. One thing Cloudimize does incredibly well is very deep dependency mapping as well, and then deep tie into ASR. So as a tool, it enables you then to easily flow on to partners like Cloud Endure and ASR and others as well after that discovery piece. But I think again, you'd have to then determine what's the best tool for you as you sort of move forward. Cloudimize also enables you to do continued optimization and right sizing also once you're in Azure as well through continued utilization reporting. So I think there's a lot of capability in this partner ecosystem. Another one is TSO Logic. TSO Logic superpower is cost analysis. They have an incredible relationship with Intel over a vast amount of years where they can actually go down and look at sort of the exact cost of on-premises hardware and do cost analysis of that within Azure and with AWS and GCP and others as well. So if you want to really understand an ROI perspective, it's a really good way of doing it. Another thing TSO does really well is they tend to run the discovery and assessment capabilities directly with you and then engage a partner to do the migration as well. So there's some cost benefits associated with that as well. So again, it's I think a great technology, and we've got a website which I'll talk a little bit about as well, which can help you sort of navigate the best partner for you itself. Cloud Physics. Which for some, oh, there they got a little logo down the right-hand side. Cloud Physics is another discovery and assessment partner. One thing Cloud Physics does really well is storage analysis. I love them for this. So Cloud Physics, it has done a lot of work with us for a very long time around re-architecting or rebalancing storage on premises. And they've done, so they can go deep into file server clusters and stuff like that and rebalance those. They've taken that capability into the cloud now and actually think about how do we take these large amounts of storage capabilities and migrate them into the best way into Azure and the cost analysis in Azure. So again, they provide a lot of capability in that space as well. And then the other one I have is Movera. In fact, what I want to do is invite Andrew up on stage, who's their chief evangelist, to talk a little bit about Movera discovery and assessment and show you a really cool demo of this. I'll let you flip over.
Thank you, Michael.
No worries.
All right, good morning all. My name is Andrew Ireland. As Michael said, I'm with Unified Logic and we're the creators of Movera. If you let me off the leash, I will talk the ear off an elephant. Okay, so how do we keep that under control? We just went through our SOC certification. And so my control today is my personal and professional boss, my wife, sitting right here. And when you suddenly see arms waving like that, that's her way of saying, shut up and move on. So, okay, there it is. Control effective. We'll have to remember that for the next test. So the one thing I'll start off with is moving to the cloud, having done it, becomes addictive. And I'll explain why. 2 years ago, we were a monolithic application. We did what we did. It put enormous limitations on us. We could not scale. We were bound to one zone, one region, and our DR costs were heinous, really, really difficult. So we started looking at the cloud. Now, when Michael started talking, he talked about his why for Azure. Our why, when we look internally, is to challenge the norm, to unlock potential. Now, when we started our cloud discovery, our cloud journey, I should say, we started asking partners that we knew in the ecosystem that we lived in, how do we get to the cloud? And the comment was pretty consistent. Slurp your machines up, let them run up there for a while. If you run out of budget, well, you're going to have to ask for more money, but then optimize them once you get there. So not to say that's not the right way to do it, but again, we challenged that norm and we thought, well, let's go at it ourselves. Before we start moving everything up, let's see if we can actually build it, optimize it, and that resulted in us having to construct Movera 3 separate times. We had to build it. Now, we were under the classic model. We weren't in ARM, but we built it. It was not right. It did not sound very good, did not work very well. So we had to destroy it, start again, destroy it, start again, until we hit the target. And so we then morphed into this Azure or cloud migration organization. And we did that simply because we started asking the question, as we've done for years, how do we take that pain away from our customer? How do we stop them experiencing what we experienced? Now, I am proud to say that our solution, our stack, is actually 80% containerized. So if you want help with containerization, we're more than happy to walk you through our Confluence. We're more than happy to walk you through our stack. We've done it with our technology. We'll be rolling SQL Linux containers out of development shortly, so there'll be a little bit more of our stack that'll be containerized. But the starting point, and this is why I brought up the fact that the cloud is addictive, it's really, really addictive when you start moving things up because you suddenly start asking questions like, how do I get rid of it all? And that doesn't mean that there's the solution is simply VMs in the cloud. There's many services in the cloud. 40% of our Azure bill is actually services, not VM compute. In addition to that, you start looking, I'm not saying you get desperate, but when you start having just one or two little things left in your data center, you start looking at other SaaS solutions. HR Bamboo, Workable, things of that nature. And it becomes addictive. Now, one of the things that I was really excited about was the fact that We are a company that no longer has data centers. Just by getting rid of our data center, not having that as a requirement, when we renewed our lease, we got into an office that's 50% larger than our old one at almost the same price. Our real estate agent didn't understand. That to me is a real saving. I can have more people on-prem doing work than actually just cooling a building. Now, to move the cloud, it creates the concept of completeness. Am I actually seeing everything in my environment? So this is Movair that you're looking at on screen. We do have what's called a springboard. It looks like this. It pulls down from SQL Live, and it actually refreshes every time you actually click on it. But it's giving you an overview of essentially all the different workflows that Movair can be used for. But more importantly, we're looking at the concept of completeness. I want to see all my domains. I want to see my servers running on vCenter, running on a vCenter appliance, running on ESXi, running on Zen, running on Hyper-V. I want to see everything. And I also want to see everything that I'm not simply aware of because it's not in my domain. So Movair does all of that, but more importantly what it does is it takes that on-prem footprint, and Michael mentioned tagging. The same thing applies to us. Tagging is absolutely critical. We actually are going to be offering infinite tagging. The reason being is that you actually don't want to just simply look at one resource. We want to look at resources as they interact with other people in our organization. But what Movair does is it takes all this data, and how does it get it? This solution was built for very large organizations. They're not simply in one location, one domain, one data center. So we built this console, very lightweight. You can see it does all sorts of different things, ESXi, Zen, Office 365, you name it. But it takes this data and it actually slings it straight to the cloud for processing. Doesn't matter how many times you run it, it slings it up. Now what it also does is it actually gives us the concept of consumption. So one of the inhibitors that we had was we wanted to actually move to the cloud, but we didn't know what capacity we actually needed. And we couldn't wait to actually move to the cloud, get consumption data for there, and then resize. So how do we do it? We actually invented what's called the ARC, the Actual Resource Consumption Engine. And so what we first of all started off by doing to see if there was actually worth us making this journey was we sized our on-prem footprint at a single-threaded compute capacity level, and we actually calculated what that would look like for the equivalent compute capacity in Azure. That's what we did. And that's what it would look like if we just simply lifted and shifted our on-prem environment into the cloud. That's what we'd be dealing with. So then what we did was we said, okay, let's price that out. What are we going to be looking at? And so we can see here, if we lifted and shifted that environment, just a straight slurp it up, get it done. We're in a hurry. We're looking at about $80,000 a month in compute alone. Now we've got views obviously for storage, but essentially that's what it would look like. Now we can go granular, we can break it down to a device level and do sizings, but the more important piece is I need to know how hard these servers are working. So that brings us to the concept of consumption. Movair collects consumption data in increments for a duration set by the customer. We do offer 95 and 99% comfort levels in the calculations. But what we're doing here is we're essentially saying, based on how hard that machine is working, whether you scan it for a week, a month, a day, 3 months, whatever, that is the compute capacity you'd need to satisfy 99% of your peak workload. What we then do is we actually price that out. So we actually say, what would the actual true saving be? And now you see, instead of the $80,000, I'm dropping down to $27,000. Now, it was this sort of analysis that actually got us addicted to the cost reduction, and that addiction morphed into containerization. And it really did, and that's why we're now 80% containerized. We did get hooked on it, okay? Now, that then brings us to the concept of a few cloud issues that we had to deal with. The first one is, if you're a global company, you need to know where your machines are. So Movair actually goes out and geotags your devices. It tells us where in the world they are. That then brings us to the concept of migrating. I don't necessarily want to migrate my machines in Austria. I don't necessarily want to migrate my machines in London. I may not want to do that. But what I do want to do is I might want to focus in on a particular area, like a data center we might have in Washington that's right near the airport. It might be this little guy here. I might want to move that. I can select that location, actually hone in on it, and then what I can actually do is I can come back to my Azure views. Oops, if I actually click on the right one. And I can see what the sizing, what the pricing would be to move the servers that are just in that location. Now that brings us to the next challenge. Again, we face this as a company that services worldwide. Not all regions, whether it's Azure or AWS, not all regions offer all sizes. So when you need data residency, you're exposed to the Brexit issue, you might be in South UK. You don't get G boxes. But if your optimization tool says you should be building on Gs, you've got a problem. So Movair actually overlaces multiple data points. It looks at IOPS, it looks at throughput, it looks at memory usage memory and CPU usage down to the process level. It takes all these balls. We talk internally about juggling about 9 balls at once, but it brings all these data points together, and it actually says what are the top 12 sizes in Movair based on cost. It is sorted highest to lowest. And then as you go from region to region, it'll actually recommend the one that matches best, okay? So as I change regions here, these sizings will slot down to the next best recommendation. Now, finally, we have what we talked about was dependency mapping. Yes, it is extremely important to do dependency mapping. We actually, I want to get the exact wording because I'll say it wrong. So I actually did write it down. If I can get this to open, we actually do network and database level dependencies. Okay, so there's my bone to Andy. He is our creator. And so what we do here is we have the ability to actually drill down to products like SQL, and we can actually drill down to the instance level. We can drill down to the database level, so we don't care about all those system databases. We just want to go to our app. We can see the dependencies, where they're coming from, what they're connecting from, who's actually doing it. And so really, this is the core of Movair. Now, this is all done with no installation. So if you're a pharmaceutical company, if you're in a highly regulated organization where you can't install agents, Movair can do scanning without agents. You don't lose any of the richness. All the data that we collect by deploying a 2 meg bot onto your machine, you'll still get it by scanning remotely. And essentially, this data is ongoing. So it's that constant upload integration. You're not constantly redoing your analysis from scratch. Now, one thing I'll point out, one person in the audience here is Chris Daniels. He's the US Director of Data Insights. He is responsible for about 12,000 managed accounts in the US. And he is the person who has actually purchased a subscription for those organizations. Now, many of you will probably be within his scope. And what that means is if you're interested in Movair, you can contact his team, you can contact your account rep, get to his team. It is Chris Daniels. We can get you his details if you want them. And we can actually get you into Movair free of charge for 90 days. There is no restrictions. It's not like I don't get consumption data, I only get inventory or vice versa, none of that. Doesn't mean we don't get sizing because it's a trial, none of that. In addition to that, if you actually go through Chris's program, we do actually offer 50% off an annual subscription as well. So that's essentially Movair, and the key element is we want to actually get the sizings right before we move, and better yet, instead of just simply moving everything and then worrying about it once it's off-prem, if there's opportunities to containerize, that's another area where my CTO is particularly passionate. If there's another opportunity to containerize before we move, we want to help you with those as well, and Movair already has the insights to do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, you can just see the depth and richness that many of our partner ecosystems sort of have in this space, which I think is super exciting. Now, a couple other things before we sort of wrap up. Talked a little bit about Azure Migrate, and I'm sort of looking to the future here, Azure Migrate server replication. Basically, the ASR technology, if you want to do server replication or migration of virtual machines today, you've got plenty of choices. ASR is one of them. If you haven't seen ASR, it's our disaster recovery tool, Azure Site Recovery. Now, if you think about disaster recovery is literally just two-way migration. I'm migrating to Azure, and then I migrate back to on-premises if a disaster happens. So when we talk about migration, we just don't do the second half, right? Your replication's already done. So we just steal all their good code, and we're going to shove it into Azure Migrate as a great solution as well. So I think moving forward, all the great sort of Azure site recovery capabilities that you've either know today or will know will be part of our Azure Migrate platform. The good thing about this as well is we'll also reduce some of the sort of barriers that we see with ASR, especially around availability of the time length when we have in migration. At the moment, you have a 31-day window to do your migration. Sounds like a lot. You know, a lot of migration programs, 31 days actually may be a little tight. You know, there's definitely, and then Microsoft's always going to be there to help you if you know, you're running into that sort of time frame issues in 31 days. Just contact your local rep and we can help you with that. But again, putting this sort of taking the migration functionality and putting it with a migration tool is going to help ensure that you have the time length and the capability you need to migrate at your comfort level associated with that. Now, for people that don't know what ASR is, it's effectively replication, a synchronous replication where I can take, the data on premises and I can replicate that into Azure and keep it up to date. And I've got ability to configure that based on latency, stuff like that, whether I'm fast internet or slow internet, how close do I want it every 30 seconds, do I want it every 5 minutes? And then it gives me the ability, which I think is wonderful, is to say, hey, once I've got all that virtual machines replicated in Azure, I want to test it, but I don't want to sort of break into my production Azure environment to do that. I can whip up an isolated environment. It does this automatically, and I can test that application in an isolated environment in my infrastructure, which is just awesome in trying to test these applications to ensure the confidence of these applications. So some really great capabilities that ASR provides. But there's also a couple of other tools as well. Cloud Endurer. Many of you probably know Cloud Endurer, and who do very similar server replication capabilities. And the great thing, some of the things with Cloud Endurer is Cloud Endurer does replication. We don't. Right? So if you've got a vast set of services, a vast set of different OSs, a vast set of different applications, Cloud Endurer is a great platform for that anywhere to any time sort of migration itself. Very similar in the way they do replication. They have other capabilities as well. Again, fully integrated. If you want to use Azure Migrate for discovery, you can use Cloud Endurer for the replication. Another company that we've been working with is, let me build that slide out. There we go. Is Velastrata. Now, Velastrata does it very differently. When we think about ASR and other migration technologies, plate spin and 5.9s and things like that. Oh, apparently there's an auto build. Look at that. When we think about those, they all work with replication. I'm going to take the virtual machine as a container, if you let me use that term, and I'm going to copy that, replicate that into Azure, and then I'm going to keep it in sync, right? And that's that's what we all do. We just do different ways. We've all got different bells and whistles, and we tie the bows a little bit differently, but that's essentially what we do. God, this slide doesn't want to show, does it? All right? But Velastrata take it a little different. So Velastrata were ex-Cisco engineers. They built the WAN optimization capability for Cisco, and they went, hey, there's something in this, right? What? Part of replication, or part of challenges with migration, let me see if I can take a build back. There we go. Part of the challenges with replication is I've got a sort of a finite number of virtual machines I can replicate per day or per month that I can shove through the pipe, right, from a tooling perspective. So if I want to migrate 1,000 virtual machines and I've got 6 months to do it, then replication technology may be the right way for me to go. But if I've got 1,000 virtual machines and I need to do it in a week, that's tough. That's a tough proposition, right? So Velastrata looked at it a different way, and they went, you know what we're going to do? We're going to migrate the compute right away. So we're going to take the compute and put that in Azure, right? The memory, the virtual CPUs, put that in Azure. And we're going to leave the storage, the VHDs, the VMDKs and on-premises, right? And then we're going to use optimization bandwidth to sort of stream that data to Azure. So essentially, you get to migrate compute super fast. Tens and tens of virtual machines a day. They're even claiming hundreds of virtual machines a day, which I think is great. And then over time, that storage will replicate. But it means that you could be instantly up and running. So again, if you need to have fast replication. Now, there are things you need to think about that. What's your bandwidth like? You're not going to be able to run this over 14K4 modems, right? I mean, you need to think about the bandwidth aspects of it. But again, these guys are just super smart, ex-Cisco guys. They've got this WAN optimization thing down packed. So again, different ways for doing things. The last area that I want to talk about quickly was optimization. Now, the cost optimization, or which we now is called Azure Cost Management by Cloud Endurer, Cloud-In, not Cloud Endurer, but Cloud-In, which is available today as part of your billing aspects of Azure, and you'll see the Cloud-In tech roll into Azure over the next 12 months. But this basically, if you saw that demo I did on Monday, this basically gives you, not only an incredible amount of budgeting reports, but from a migration perspective, it enables you to ensure that you're continuing that cost optimization capability. Once those virtual machines are in Azure, are we utilizing them the right way? Are we still driving them at 95%? And if we're not, tell me, and then give me recommendations on what it should be. I don't want to have to go and do this. So this is what the cloud and capability is going to do continually with around a migration piece. And again, you'll see a lot of these tech as to sort of tie together through Azure Migrate as we sort of build these solutions as well. We also think about optimization and modernization. There's a great company called Cloud Atlas. And they have this awesome tool called Cloud Pilot. And Cloud Atlas have a good portfolio of technology. They actually aren't a discovery partner themselves. They use the data from discovery partners like MoveAir, like maps that we have, like Azure Migrate moving forward, and they put an analysis and assessment on top of it. One of their superpowers is modernization of applications. Because when I'm in the optimization phase, I want to start thinking about that. And what they can do is they can come into an application and scan that application and tell you how to get it working on Azure, what you need to re-architect, right? It's very, very cool technology in the way that we do things. So again, I would check them out. They've got some really great offers at the moment on how to think about that re-architecture. One of the things that they're also starting to build now is early on in the phase, they'll help you do containerization of your applications. So they'll actually look at applications and say, yeah, VM, containerize or app services, your choice. And they'll help you do that migration itself. So I think that's super, super exciting in that phase, how we do things. So with that, hopefully we walk you through this morning some of the aspects of sort of lift and shift and VM capability, some of the ways that Microsoft is looking at it, some of the ways that our partners are going to help. I want to leave you with a website. I might use Edge for this one to make me feel a little bit better. So we just launched a new website called Azure Migrate Center. Migration Center. Sorry, I got migrate on my brain. So, all right, and the Azure Migration Center, while having some wonderful videos, gives you sort of a lot of the things that we talked about today. More information, more resources, hands-on labs, the migration proof of concept. So you can take this tool, this white paper, fairly long, you could pretty much beat a whale to death with it, but it gives you the choice of saying, hey, look at this proof of concept with Azure Migrate, with Cloudimize, or with MoveAir, and you can actually run a proof of concept to see how it looks, to see how it feels, including ASR, taking an application and migrating that application. With ASR, remember, you can migrate it into an isolated environment and just feel it through. What's all the processes associated with this? The new hands-on lab, go and experience this for yourself. There's an Azure Migrate hands-on lab. You can do this right now here, or you can just click on this link anytime. You can go to a hands-on lab area and actually do this right now. And not only that, I think one of the wonderful things about this new site is it not only has new sort of resources around those, but then it has great new partner resources as well. So if you want to learn more about our partners, MoveAir, they've not only got demo videos, but they built training videos, right? Grab a cup of coffee, a couple of cold beers, sit down and watch the training video and understand this stuff a little bit more. Look at their data sheets and overviews. And again, we've got all these great partners that we're working with as we walk through this as well. So again, I think this is a nice one-stop shop for you as you're starting to build that journey of migration to understand a little bit more. I think this is a really good resource for you as well. So hopefully this was worth your time this morning as you're getting more information associated with this. Thank you for spending time. I know it's super hard to start up at 9 o'clock in the morning, so hard and late in the week as well. But enjoy the rest of your tech ed, Ignite. Sorry. It's burnt into the brain. And have fun tonight at Universal. Hey, thank you so much.